Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along this morning. My name's Tom Langston, and with me is Mike Wilson, and we're going to be looking at taking Moodle and online learning to the next level. So if you go to the next slide. I was looking to see if with Google Slides you like co-present and like move on someone else's screen, but quickly I can't find that as an option, which is I think a bit of a faux pas for such a collaborative tool. But anyway, what we're going to kind of look at today are the importances of structure when designing, planning, and looking at creating your online materials and how that can transfer into Moodle. Looking at and how to approach sort of the key tools within Moodle, but again, what can work for you. And then basically just sort of the positive approaches to activities, again, kind of being a mindset rather than a technology kind of thought process. And we've got a little activity and want this at the end to be a little more discussive, which might be nice with the smaller group that we do have. And like I say, we can see how it plays out. So I'll hand you over to Mike to start off with the importance of structure.
Okie dokie. Right, so I'm gonna whiz through this first bit because it's really just kind of recap of what we've kind of recommended so far, I suppose, and what people are doing in TB1. So what I'm showing is a screenshot of the Moodle template, which we developed for the kind of the rapid transition to online teaching. So it's all part of Blended and Connected, which is our kind of brand for the Moodle template, and active blended learning, which is something I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about. But the template itself, when you go onto your Moodle site and you're creating a new module, you have all your weeks filled with these guidance labels, and really what they're communicating is the flipped delivery mechanism, which is the default starting position for teaching online. It's a proven methodology. It's easy to engage with, but I'm going to talk about how to get the best out of that approach, but also some slightly more advanced approaches and some best practice that other people have been working on that might be able to help you. So as Tom says, we're talking about structure to start with, really. So the first section of any week, any of these template weeks, is the weekly introduction. And these are really asynchronous activities. So they're student-centered, instructor-led, but importantly, they're student-paced. So students can work through them in their own time, recap bits they want to spend more time on, and they can work through it at their own time. The key to getting the best out of these resources, so they're generally pre-recorded lectures and other materials, and I'll show you a screenshot of that in a second. But the key to getting the best out of these pre-recorded lectures and materials is structuring the content well. So generally we'd recommend bite-sized videos of about 5 to 10 minutes for each topic, and then scaffolding those videos with questions. So you can use things like H5p to ask questions of students as they work through it, so they can test their own knowledge and make sure they've understood what you try to convey. But you can also scaffold it with obviously text and images and other media. But the key to this is a clear linear progression of knowledge. So you're kind of building on the points that you're making, and it's easy for students to understand as they work through it. It's very well signposted. And this has been proven to help students keep students engaged because they are working through it at their own pace. You can deliver this as one recorded lecture within Panopto with signposting to the sections and even questions in between it. But we found that the Moodle book is a good way of structuring this content. That's the optimum way of delivering this. But obviously time is a challenge, and colleagues have come up with different ways of approaching this. But I'll talk about the kind of default position, as I say, and show you some other approaches to it. The second part of any given week is kind of given over to a synchronous activity. So these should be rich collaborative activities kind of geared around teamwork, discussion, problem solving, role play, but they're all about active engagement. So getting students involved in the discussion, and there are a chance for students to ask questions about things they haven't quite understood about the asynchronous activities they've worked through. but it's a way also of providing community or a community feel for resources. Students are, can feel quite isolated working on their own, and that's a theme that students have fed back over the last teaching block, is that they miss that on-campus feeling of community. So this is the type of activity that can help with those type of themes. So let's have a look at what this can look like. So here's a weekly introduction. Kind of exaggerate this point, but it's really key that there's a video at the start of each week, a friendly video, just kind of welcoming students to the topic and laying out what you want students to do in the first part of any week. It doesn't have to be long. A couple of minutes is fine, just laying out what you want students to do. There's generally a pre-recorded lecture. As I say, a Moodle book is a good way to distribute that. You'd have your accompanying slides, any core reading, and a knowledge check. So this could be a knowledge activity like a quiz, or what else could you do? A H5p activity, or as I say, you could break up your pre-recorded lecture with knowledge check activities within it. So you're checking whether students have understood, so it can influence any recap activities later in the week, but it also lets students know whether they have understood the point or not, or whether they need a bit more clarification. Okay, the second part, as I say, the group collaborative activity. It's a bit of a wordy title, but one thing to point out here, that all these titles are changeable. The template is very flexible. We can change the titles, call it whatever you want, whether it's a seminar or discussion, or a team working task. Call it whatever you want, whatever's appropriate within your area. And you don't have to stick to these headings. Within the text editor within Moodle, you'll find a load of these headings for lots of other activities as well. So you can mix and match them, and you can get creative when you feel confident about teaching online. But a good starting point, really, in terms of tools, is most people will be using Zoom to facilitate these sessions, because it's very easy to create breakout sessions. You can combine other tools with it, such as Padlet. Padlet's a very good activity for creating a structured canvas for discussion activities that aren't necessarily, we've seen some students aren't engaging in some of the breakout rooms. So Padlet is a good way of kind of taking the camera out of it. So students reply with text, and then you can ask students to expand on the point, as Ale was doing in the first session. But there are lots of different ways of approaching these activities, and lots of different tools you can use to do that. So I'll talk about some of those, but Tom will be talking about kind of some really good examples of activities you can run in the second half of the session. So we've covered kind of the default kind of position on it. So it's a good way to get started with teaching online. But if you really want to kind of maximize student engagement, there are other ways of doing it. And in the last mini-fest in November, Matt Parker kindly delivered a session on techniques for maximizing student engagement. I'd really encourage you to go along and have a look at this session. So Matt walks you through one of his sessions and the approaches he takes to kind of maximize student engagement, to make sure students are taking part, and some of those approaches. I'll summarize what some of those bits now for you. So in any given week, it starts with an asynchronous activity, again, as with the template. So pre-recorded lecture in a Moodle book, broken down into chunks, because that's he has found is keep students engaged. Importantly, he asks for questions in advance of the synchronous session. So in advance of that seminar or discussion, he asks students to contribute any questions to a Q&A forum, which is a type of forum on Moodle. So other students can come back with feedback, and he can come back with kind of definitive answers to things. So it's a bit of a knowledge base for students to work from, but it also kind of guards against that kind of dead air when you ask the questions in a session. You know that there will be some questions, and it also kind of helps him establish what things may need to be recapped in that session. So when it comes to the synchronous kind of activity, he always starts with a real-time interactive quiz. We've got lots of tools that you can use to do that. Matt prefers quizzes.com, but we've also got Nearpod and Kahoot, which will do the same thing. So it's a quiz on the topic for the week, and his students have found that very engaging. They know it's going to start with a quiz. They find it quite fun, and it kind of sets the energy for the session. Within the session itself, when he gets started, he summarises the key points from the week, and he's found that to be really important because students don't always work through this material before the synchronous session. So if they haven't had the time or they haven't bothered to go through the recorded materials, there's still some value in them coming to the synchronous session. The key points that were covered will be covered. They can always go back to the pre-recorded lecture if they want to after the fact. And importantly, these synchronous sessions, so students are very tactical in what they'll learn because they're covering a lot of materials and they're trying to work through it. So the content in the synchronous sessions links directly to the assessment topics. So there's a perceived added value for the students. If I go to this session, I'll learn something about the assessment we're going to be doing. So that's a kind of a key point that's helped get students engaged with those sessions. So as I say, really encourage you to go and have a look at that session from Matt. It's only an hour long, but it lays out some more detail really to what I've just summarised here. Really worth a watch. One of the theories that the template and our resources that we've delivered over the summer is active blended learning. So if you really want to get students engaged, following these principles of active blended learning will help you build better activities and structure them very well. Andy Clegg has delivered an online Moodle module called Active Blended Learning, which you can find at this link. We'll share this at the end. It contains a number of workbooks based on the principles of ABL, and one that's particularly relevant to this session is Section 2, Designing for Active Blended Learning. It's based on the proven principles of ABC, so the ABC model for learning developed by UCL, and the 5 stages model for online learning development produced by Professor Gilly Salmon. I'll briefly cover some of the tools that are covered on that module, so you can get an idea of how it fits together. So Andy lays it out very, very nicely. Lots of videos to kind of help support this process. But at the core of this, activities that you deliver online and actually face-to-face as well, roughly fall into 6 categories: acquisition, collaboration, practice, investigation, production, and discussion. So in this PowerPoint presentation that you'll find in section 2, you'll find a description of what each of these are. So taking collaboration, for instance, that's quite a straightforward one to understand. Each one has some suggested activities you can run with students and some digital tools you can use to facilitate those activities. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look and work through these materials, just if you want some ideas of creating more engaging activities, or you want to, if you run the same thing again and again, students do tend to, I think, get a little bit bored with the process. So maybe this will offer some help with kind of designing some different types of activities you can deliver. What's really key with this delivering online, as with delivering face-to-face, is planning ahead and planning your activities and working out how they'll fit together. So the second slide in this presentation is a tool really that you can use to plan your sessions. You can do it on your own. You can plan out the activities you're going to run. You can allocate time to those activities and kind of detail what you're going to do in each session. So you can kind of break your topic area down. But this is really designed to be a collaborative tool as well. So to kind of foster a team approach. So as a team, you can work out kind of which bits you're going to deliver, which bits your colleagues are going to deliver, and kind of really kind of map out the cheating block. And that will really help when it comes to creating activities online, just having kind of a plan that you're all working to. So I really encourage you to go and have a look at this PowerPoint presentation. It's got some really good tools to help you. So at that point, now we've kind of started talking about activities and kind of the rich activities you could deliver. I'll hand over to Tom, who's going to talk about some good examples.
Mouse is jumping all over the screen. I can hit the mute button. Thank you, Mike. Yes. So carrying on from that, and I've actually taken some notes to add into this from what Mike was saying and relate it back to what Mike was saying. But in this section with sort of some Moodle examples, I've kind of got 3 bits before we get the discussion activity going. But starting with more, where this is going on is more than just the basics. We obviously fall into habits very easily, and that's not a bad thing where we're trying to get a lot of work done and a lot of things out in a very strange circumstance and situation. What I think we need to sort of look at, though, is taking other ideas forward and how we can do that. So for me, probably the first simple one to go through relates back to what Mike was actually saying in the session prior to this. Again, we'll make sure that's up on the site, but it's about kind of using the Moodle quiz just in different ways. He was talking in a very sort of examination sort of focused mold. But if you can click the link for me, Mike, for the MCQ quiz, we'll put this link into Moodle for everyone. I made this, unsurprisingly, as you can tell by the name of the site, at Christmas. It was something we did as a team. People hated me by the end, but I'm fine with that. But what it has in there is a whole range of different question types doing something different. So, for instance, if Mike, you can click on the logo one for me. What I used was what's called a closed question type. And what we have is a whole range of logos, and they can type their answers in the boxes. So it's a fairly simple activity for the student to do, but it's not just an MCQ. They have to kind of work out what they know and what they don't know, and it's a good way for you to then sort of track how much of that they could do. If you go back, see how much Mike can remember, and they can then finish the attempt. It'll submit that, and you can then see where they got to. Bit too far back, but it doesn't matter. Essentially, what I also did in there, and again, I've put myself on the altar of humility. With Spray That Again, what I did was gargle famous Christmas songs. Not the nicest thing, but again, it was kind of just something that's a little bit silly and a little bit fun. It's using a short answer question, but it's mixed with multimedia. So they're not necessarily that hard to produce and that hard to sort of work to, but they're using more than just MCQs to test and engage a student in different ways. So again, for those who have access to Moodle, we will give you that link. So you can, again, look at the Christmas quiz should you want. I think it's a good example of different question types. It's also just, like I say, a little bit of fun, even though it's no longer Christmas. So if we go back to the PowerPoint for me, please, Mike, thank you. And lastly here, we're going to go through a few slides about similarities of H5p in the Moodle lesson. Now, before we do move on, where Mike was talking about sort of the Moodle book being a really good way of containing material and containing the information that we, so like you take your 5-minute videos and you have a knowledge check and all the rest of it. The Moodle lesson tool is actually very similar to the Moodle book in some respects and has its own inbuilt question types. So you could use the Moodle lesson. Again, we recommended the book for the simplicity of it. But actually, if you're looking at moving a little bit further along, I know, just having to see Gemma there, I know that in ICGS for the Police Law and Community Unit, they were initially looking at using the lessons as workbooks. So I think it changed because of other reasons at that time, and this was a good few years ago. But essentially what it meant was You can have a table of contents. They can jump through the content. You have the written stuff. You can add videos, audios, and images, but you can add kind of knowledge checks within that environment as well, so you don't have to bring in something like H5p. Obviously, H5p is really nice and maybe looks a little nicer, but it depends on what you're trying to do and where you're trying to get to with it. So if you can go to the next slide for me, please, Mike. So in this case, I've done a kind of quick comparison of why sort of H5p versus Moodle, or the Moodle lesson, because within H5p, I'm sure many of you now know, and all the different sessions we run for these mini fests and training sessions on H5p. H5p has an awful lot of tools. It's not just one thing, it's a lot of things. I am specifically in this case to kind of take it to the next level, looking at the branching tool. And the reason it takes it to the next level is A, it just takes so much longer to kind of plan and produce, which is, again, not something I know you guys want to hear at the moment, but it does provide that next kind of higher level thinking that Mike was talking about earlier on, in the exam sort of scenarios, where you're trying to promote higher order thinking and not just necessarily kind of something that's easy for them to work through. So in this one, I've got kind of two examples that I've made here. I did a kind of a questionnaire. It was at this time in the Moodle lesson, although I did take it to the questionnaire in the end. But there's that kind of way of working. But above that, I've got my go-to geek mode of, you're locked in a room, you wake up in a room, and you basically select an option and it takes you through a different path. So whichever sort of choice you make will take you to a different part of that story, which again is why it can take a lot longer, because you have to plan that story in advance. If you can go to the next slide again, please, Mike. Just to kind of show you in the Moodle lesson how that would work. So there's you're locked in a room. That was the bit I demonstrated. And underneath that, you can see how the structure goes. It's a long list. And again, if you go to the next one, there's two views. That's the collapsed. This would be the expanded, where you can see where the jumps are. And jumps are basically what you call the buttons to go to a different piece of content. And the bit I'm going to come back to from something Mike just said, with H5p and Panopto in that idea, is what you can do in H5p and Panopto is add links to other bits. So where Mike was talking about having knowledge checks, if a student kind of knows certain elements of what you're teaching, if you can almost on an interactive video have a navigation map, so they go to the bit they need, not trying to find it in a 25-minute video. They can just go and watch that 3-minute bit and then be presented with another menu, which is, again, I'll show you the H5p side of that in the branching tool, but you can also do it in just the interactive video side of things. And again, Panopto can do the same sort of thing, where you can jump to websites, jump to other links in Moodle or elsewhere, provide them with other videos inside of it. You can get Inception level videos within Panopto. It's quite a powerful tool. And it's the same idea here with the Moodle lesson, that what you're doing is jumping them off from what they know. Like I say, mine's the geek version of that, of, the old role-playing games when it was text-based. But actually, it does now translate nicely to the student might know about X, which would, in a linear fashion come next. They can jump to the bit they need to know, but still get to other bits if they need it. So again, next slide, please. So yeah, here we are, the H5p branching scenario, which directly equates to the Moodle lesson. So next one, please. It's a lot nicer an interface. On the left-hand side, you can see all the different things you can add. If you go to the next slide, please, you basically drag and drop onto the plus, and it adds that kind of element into the structure. If we skip on to the next one, here's one I made earlier with random text hitting the keys, but you see the idea that you start at the top. I've created branches, and they can go down different paths, and you can have multiple sort of sections to a path. And what's quite nice with this is you don't have to do it as a story. One of their demo examples is talking about Renaissance paintings, and so I think actually it's wider than that. It's like art history, And so you choose Renaissance painters, or do you choose, you know, Impressionists, or whatever it might be, and you go down and do that path. Then at the end, you click back to another selection. So if you click to the next slide, you can kind of see that demonstrated here, where that little red kind of circular arrow, thank you, that's showing that from that slide, the jump point goes back to the top, and they can start that process again and choose a different path. And you can set that to any kind of other point within the environment of a H5p branching tool. So in one respect, it's much better than the Moodle lesson, as it's visually much easier to see where things are going, where things are jumping to, and it's really kind of modular and drag and droppy and really easy to work in that respect. Obviously, with the Moodle one, you are working within that Moodle environment and kind of working with something that may be a little more familiar. So if we go to the next slide, I think that's, yeah, that's kind of it in one respect. But what we wanted to kind of do was kind of open up the discussion. So if you can copy, I can do that as well. I can go down to the last slide here. If I copy and paste, copy URL. If you would like to click on this, what we have started for, and as you can tell, our vain attempt at humor, do you work like proper good? Basically, we've posed sort of 3 questions. We're not necessarily asking you to answer those directly, but what things have worked for you so far? What have you found easy? What have you found difficult? What tools have you found that are being engaged with? And like Mike said from the previous session, the maths session, we presented the blended learning model, but he kind of flipped it a little bit on its head and made it that we, in one respect, you know, thinking the worst of students, which we shouldn't ever do, but it's like they won't turn up to a seminar having done that learning bit. So, but Matt kind of realized this and was like, well, I'll teach them a little bit of this, but then there's still the learning content that they need to do. And actually, by turning up to the seminar, they realize what they don't know. They get something from the discussion, but go back into the lecture. So the lecture almost comes after the seminar because they realize what they don't know. Whereas if they have to do it front loaded, they kind of go, oh, I'll just ask him a question in the thing. And so actually he's done a few different tips and ideas. So feel free to put it on here. Feel free to just unmute yourself, and anything that's worked for you, please do just join in. And if no one has anything to say, I'm sure we can make something up for you. And as you can see, the 2 questions I've put there, they are different, although similar. What tools engaged your students, and then what tools engaged you as a creator? Because I think that's just before lockdown happened, Mike and I went to the DigiFest. Was it Birmingham way? Yeah, up in Birmingham. And it was really interesting. They had a fairly young chap speaking on the first day as a keynote. And one of the big things I took away from that, apart from him not wearing any socks, which was what dominated most of that conversation, was his idea that we as educators do tend to think it's us that's the problem. So it's like you'll get a bit of technology, you'll go and try and learn it, and you think, oh, I can't do it. It's probably me. I'm not very confident with this. I'm not happy. Whereas he was like the Gen Z, the students that we're getting through at that sort of 18, 19 years of age, they may not know how to use technology in education in the same way, but they are much more confident in going, I'll try it. That didn't work. It was the software. It's not me. It's that. It doesn't work intuitively. And so they're much quicker to dump an idea than maybe we are, for different reasons, at least. So it's that kind of idea as well, that Yeah, so I've got stuff coming in. So which tools engage your students? So Wendy said Padlet has allowed question and answers to be seen by everyone. Interviews, podcasts, YouTube style with experts. Yeah, that's a good one. Padlet is another one. I liked that idea of the kind of interview with experts. I know that Dan Brown in science did this before lockdown. I helped him kind of do that. And then I helped start him. He definitely ran away with that idea, but he was very much interviewing people that he knew from his experiences who were experts in their field. And then Heather Massey as well in science, interviewing people about extreme conditions and doing things that not many other humans would ever consider doing.
It also, Tom, gets them to hear academic argument as well, where you've got opposing views or questioning views. So that critical discourse, exposing them to the critical discourse rather than the sort of Twitter bite that the biases. Yeah.
That's a very good point, isn't it? Where through Google and Twitter and all that, you follow people and it tracks your search history according to what you look for. And you do end up in a bubble, not realizing that there's stuff. It can be hard to break out of that if you're not deliberately sort of pushing for it. So yes, something like that is a very good example of they're not having to directly engage like they would do with, say, a Nearpod activity and doing something, but what they're doing is hearing other arguments, other perspectives that they may not find through their own general searching and from their bias. So yes, I think that's a very good kind of example. Just to kind of pick you back up on that, Heather, how did you go about or how do you go about finding those people for that discourse? Because again, is it sort of people you're interviewing yourself that you know? Are you deliberately becoming antagonistic with a colleague to show that argument?
Some of them some of them are set up by us, where we, for example, one is around, would you use this product in clinical practice? And one person has the view, well, there's not enough evidence yet. And the other person has the view, well, we know the mechanism of action, we know the pathophysiology, what risk versus benefit, and having that discussion and, at what level would evidence be sufficient? And, whole issues around evidence informed practice, there never being enough evidence. So that's one. And then we've used externals for a long time, expert externals for a long time, and we're also plugged into our industry as well. So there's also a lot of people want to get into ION to actually be speaking in front of students, because they often have something that they're selling, although they're not allowed to do the sell on in the classroom, but they quite often want to be exposed to students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's it's good to hear. And again, it's like seeing the people who are here today. And
the spin-off for that as well is that quite often we get into how they've developed their practice. So you also get that employability, entrepreneurism, those sorts of conversations layered in as well, which is quite good.
Yes, and actually I think it could be an interesting bit of trying to again on that same thing, even just at the university level, widening our scope of collaboration with other departments, because actually like you were mentioning there, you may be working in the science sort of background, but the entrepreneurship of that comes from a very different sort of marketing business-led perspective, and it would then be kind of trying to get involved other colleagues around the university from that. So again, knowing sort of a little bit from the criminology team, where they used to do, obviously on campus, the whole sort of something takes place where people are part of it. It then goes through a process of police coming in, doing interviews, statements, and it then plays out to the lawyers and the kind of legal element in the fake court, and it runs from start to finish of potential crime to prosecution. So the student gets that whole breadth of the whole criminal process. And I think if we can build those relationships, and again, you may not know where to start with that, and that's absolutely fine internally. But if you come to sort of speak to myself, Mike, send it to the academic development team. Andy is a great person for this. He seems to know everyone.
Yeah.
But I think it, going back to my first point of like taking that idea forward, you may have that idea of I want to try and involve 3 other departments, but I've no idea how to do that, so I won't bother. Feel free to ask. We can use the contacts we have that you may or may not know. We can put you in touch with other people. And it may not come to anything, but it definitely won't come to anything if you don't even ask the question.
Well, you also have partners as well. We're a partner institute, so there are quite a diversity of partners with Portsmouth, both in the UK and abroad, which could be very useful.
Yes. So people have put some posts up to what's engaged your students. Going to the what's engaged you as a creator, what is there anything that you've kind of found since March that you hadn't found before, that you've kind of gone, I mean, and it may just be Padlet again, but is there something that you found yourself? And again, we've put these 3 questions, but if you've got a question for us that you'd like to kind of ask the group, please post that as well. This is kind of the discursive idea we were hoping for at the end. How do you go about structuring your materials? Again, sorry to call on you, Gemma, just because I know you. But you've obviously come from the point in criminology where you'd done kind of almost a blended approach well before lockdown happened, and you've been doing. I know ICGS have been doing distance learning for a long time, and I know a lot of other departments have done distance learning to certain degrees. How have you found the change into everyone having to be here as opposed to it being one aspect of the department?
I think with our experience before, it definitely made some of it easier with that switch to online learning. And I think where you're right, we started it with 2 of our core level 4 modules that have over 500 students on. So that kind of initial panic when we moved to online teaching, it kind of took that pressure off there. And it's big team taught modules, so people had experience of kind of essentially in some ways kind of following that Moodle template, which is what I was kind of just writing about in terms of what has helped us, I think, is that structure of the Moodle template with having that preparation to start with. And I guess it's more, the subtleties of kind of reinforcing to students about this is expected, because you see it on all of your modules, you see it every week, that preparation, whether it's completion of a quiz, watching a kind of a video, whether it's recorded by staff or a YouTube video on a particular aspect. I think the kind of the Moodle template in some ways confirmed and set in stone for other modules what we were already doing in those core modules. So I think that definitely really helped. And H5p, so the use of like flashcards, some people have done the branching scenarios, the use of videos and embedding questions into our recorded video, explored what was available with H5p before, but had also learned a lot. So we knew what worked from the students. We knew that they don't want videos of more than kind of 8 minutes max really in length. And, not, I guess, having that ability to, or a clear structure for how they go about engaging with all of those resources, but also making it available to them. So if they need to break for a day or whatever, they can come back to it the following day and pick up where they left off and not have to kind of start all over again. So I don't actually know if that answers your question or if I've just rambled.
No, that's absolutely fine. It kind of raised that question in my head, and something Ale said this morning, where one of the points was kind of this one's more about the sort of the stick rather than sort of the carrot, in terms of this. And actually to hear that, because one of the bits we obviously had was and Mike did a lot more work on this than I did, but the building of the sort of the template could have brought about a lot of reticence from people and a lot of pushback. Like, I want it to do my way. And we did obviously try to leave, and Mike can speak to this himself, but try to leave some freedom for people to do what's right for their units. But actually, we're also getting that bit of, oh, there's too many things to choose from, just tell me what to do. it's that horrible balancing act for going forward now of how much is us sort of using the stick to say, right, this is exactly how it should look, this is what it should be, and stopping innovation, because that's the last thing we want to do, is stop people attempting and innovating and doing things. With that in mind, I see some people who aren't on the video side of it. So Mary, Wendy, Mohammed as well, is there. But how much stick would you like, and how much kind of carrot would you like? Is kind of my last question. Is do you want it to be just tell me to do this and that's it, or do you like having a bit of freedom to work?
Just to provide a bit of context, I'm working on the REF project for Portsmouth Business School. So I'm actually using a different version of Moodle elsewhere. So if you look at that, it's far, far, far away from what we see on the University of Portsmouth. So for me, it was just about getting ideas here. I don't think anything I could say would probably add to new ideas, etc., because things are much, much further. But definitely, I mean, as far as what I've seen from Mike as well, working at a previous institution, because I used to work at De Montfort University, Leicester, only arrived here 2 or 3 years ago, months ago. I could see that the approach that has been taken of this is the way to do it. I think a lot of people are busy at this moment in time with the pandemic. You heard that from earlier in Ali's presentation, where people are saying, "Oh, we're snowed under." I mean, are we going to wait till, you know, Ali comes out with his digital strategy, or just get a move on? So the stuff like what Michael was showing is really, really useful to say, well, this is where it is. Here's a bit of flexibility. And it sounds very much like if anybody has any ideas or etc., that's something that could be incorporated as well. So yeah, it works for me. Thanks. Yeah.
Mary, I see you've put your camera on.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm trying to entertain an awake puppy at the same time as listening, so I've just given her something. So yeah, I mean, my big concern is consistency, because we get a lot of concern and complaints from students if they find that there is a lack of consistency between the modules, and that they find it hard to find things on a particular site because they've got used to a certain arrangement. So I'm actually a big fan of the baseline template. I know we started on that journey sort of a year ago, didn't we? And then it's become a little bit more sophisticated. So I think that there is probably some iterative improvements that could be made. And I think probably this time around, maybe we've got more of a chance or more of an opportunity to actually take some feedback from staff who are involved far more regularly. I mean, I've got my own module, but far more regularly, sort of pushing that content out to see if there is, if they can have more of a voice this time in what is included. But I think, yeah, I'm all for some flexibility, but I think consistency is something that we know is appreciated by the students. We don't want that to stifle creativity amongst the lecturers putting their content on, but I'm sure that a happy medium can be reached. So yeah, consistency, not anarchy, I think is my slogan for today.
If I may just add into Mary's point, if I can, Tom, Mike, consistency, yeah, rings true for me as well, because what I feel as well is on the RF project, we've got module leaders for various modules. And when I arrived, they've got freedom to do pretty much what they wanted. What we're finding, and I keep on sort of complaining, is we need consistency, because you can't go into one module and call something, I don't know, a video, and then go elsewhere and call it multimedia, or, So consistency is definitely one of the things that I'm trying to send to the module leaders as well. So, yeah, the template's great, actually. If we had a template there, that would work. So that might be something that might come back to you guys for some help in the future.
Definitely. Yeah, that's fine. I just want to speak to a couple of those points. Yeah, I think we're really, it's really encouraging to hear that people are appreciating the baseline kind of pre-populatedness of it, I suppose. I think so, one of the drivers behind that, and really the template as well, is to give you kind of a good starting point, so you don't have to spend a lot of time bringing information in. So things like learning outcomes are already there. an overview of the module that you might have to bring from other places, and then having a template which gives a solid steer to kind of get started with. I think that was the idea behind it. But one of the things we've been talking about a bit recently is, would you like more templates which help map out different learning styles, or are we quite happy with the mechanism at the moment? Is that flipped delivery style what most people are using? It sounds to me like that is the style that most people are using, and then just adapting it slightly. But would you like to see more options in terms of templates to deliver different types of modules?
I think, if Mike, I can just respond on that. One of the discussions that we've kind of started, and then as with the pandemic, something else changes and suddenly you've got things that were due yesterday. But one of the conversations that we've been having with our distance learning team is about the application or the benefits of that Moodle template on our distance learning materials, because I think that's where you do get quite a lot of variation when people deliver their own distance learning module, and what some are doing, what others aren't doing. And we've had kind of over the last, this academic year, the use of Zoom sessions with our distance learning students, which wasn't something that we'd done before. And I think, coming back to the point that Mary raised about consistency, that is something that you see not just with campus students, but with distance learning students, undergraduate, postgraduate. So we kind of have, or at least started, albeit at the very early stages, discussions around kind of what we can learn from our experience with our campus students and the online learning that we've had, and where we can fit that in with distance learning. Because I think that weekly structure, and that's a kind of the debate really that we've got, is that the weekly structure is great, but also you don't want to then frighten distance learning students that perhaps can't do it on a weekly basis because of work commitments. So actually they might come back to it in 2 weeks' time. So it's about maybe framing it with topics where you kind of have that very clear structure and kind of guide them through, rather than the use of dates that you see with the Moodle template. But yeah, so I think any kind of expansion of the Moodle template beyond campus modules, I'd definitely kind of be interested in that.
That'd be fantastic. I'm doing a curriculum development project alongside for my APA actually, and what I'd like to do is speak to people and kind of work out ways that we can kind of improve the kind of mechanisms and include extra bits of guidance and approaches. It would be great if I could speak to yourselves and your colleagues about that as part of that. That'd be great, because I think when we first started thinking about the templates, we had that in mind. We thought, okay, maybe we'll have one that's a bit more blended, one's a bit more flipped, maybe we'll have one for distance delivery. So yeah, it would be great to kind of get some ideas about what you'd like to see if we had a dedicated one for distance. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool.
I think you may want to take Wendy's name as well, because in the chat she's just posted something very similar for Gemma, where she says, I think there needs to be a slightly different template for courses that are fully distance learning. Some students download it at the start of a block if they're, for instance, on a submarine, before they get to then the internet and submit an assignment. Others look to engage as the teaching block goes on. So she's used the topic approach rather than a weekly one. So again, I think that feeds to what Gemma was just sort of saying, is a sort of slightly different model to the week by week campus, although it doesn't have to. Again, it's that bit, isn't it? It's that hard thing of trying to also say on a distance course, this weekly thing is roughly where you should be on a week. It doesn't mean say you can't do 2 weeks at a time followed by having a week off, or whatever works for your distance priority. But as I fully appreciate, you see that and you suddenly go, oh, I'm 3 weeks behind, I can't do it, I'm done. And that's definitely not where you want them to be. Whereas if it's topic based, it's like, oh, I can do these 3 topics a day and I'm happy with that. So sometimes it's, as you say, reframing the mindset rather than necessarily changing content or anything in particular.
Well, we can use some of the tools in Moodle in terms of the progress kind of tracking, because Moodle is very good at kind of mapping that kind of self-paced learning. We can structure it around that a little bit more. So as you say, kind of students starting and ending at different points, where should they be, how much progress are they made, kind of making that more motivational. That would be really worth exploring. And just taking Wendy's point about if you're working on a submarine, so I guess more asynchronous activities that you can There are ways of downloading content, working on those, and then kind of resyncing. So yeah, it'd be good to have a conversation about that as well. But yeah, it would be good to kind of expand the offering a little bit and just provide some kind of some more kind of guidelines, I suppose, in the form of maybe one or two extra templates, so you can use it in different scenarios. That'd be great to have those conversations. I'm
conscious of the time and giving people the chance to break off before starting if they go into another one. There's one from Alex Sabine, which is using QR codes to augment experiences, which I think, again, would feed nicely in from where we've been talking. But equally, Tom Cripps and Richard Heath are doing one on sort of Moodle statistics and the dashboard that they've sort of been working on, which, again, plays to the trying to find out what students are actually doing, when they're doing it, how they're engaging with it. From seeing the stuff they've sort of demoed to us, it looks fantastic. So I think both would play nicely after this session. If you can't do, obviously you can't do them both, but they are being recorded. I'd recommend checking them both out if you can at some point. But yes, so unless Mike has anything else to add.
No, that's it for me. Thanks for coming along and taking part.
Thank you very much for making this a very good discussion.